group Action Society has lodged a formal complaint with the Office of the Public Protector, requesting it to investigate government's failure to deal with the DNA backlog. This comes as the backlog in DNA cases continues to rise and is currently sitting at over 200,000. For more on this, I'm joined now by Elanie van Walt of Action Society and Mark Rogers from the DNA board. Good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time. Elanie, let's start with you. I mean, would you emphatically say the turnaround strategy to deal with the DNA backlog has failed?
Thanks for the time, Tabu. I missed half of your question there for a minute, but our current stance on the DNA backlog is that it is a failure, and it's placed in front of the door of Minister of Police, Sekitele. The DNA backlog has been looming since June 2020, and it just seems that there's no urgent resolve from the minister and government in general to sort out this backlog. There's lots of talk about it, but nothing's being done on the ground to actually sort out this backlog, and it's robbing victims of rape and victims of violent crime from their day in court, because court cases are struck from the roll, and court cases are delayed up to 2-3 years, waiting for DNA evidence in court cases to actually go ahead with the prosecution. So at this stage, it's a miscarriage of justice.
Mark, is that the fact, DNA board point of view, that things have just grinded to an absolute halt, and in a sense, this is undermining justice in the country?
Good evening, Tavo, and to your viewers. Look, I mean, I think the DNA board shares the concerns around the growing backlog, but I would caution or hasten to say that, things are being done. Yes, granted, the progress is not as quick as, civil society and the rest of the public would hope for and would demand, because as Elanie rightly points out, it is a miscarriage of justice, because, victims of crime are being denied their most fundamental rights in terms of the Constitution. But what I would say is that, progress is being made. The figure of 230,000 that you've quoted, if we just cast our minds back slightly, on the 1st of June this year, the minister announced a ring-fenced figure in his ministerial cabinet announcement when the situation became apparent that it was really escalating and becoming an issue of concern. So that figure of 180,000 has effectively now been managed down to 116,000. So if you subtract that figure of 116,000 from, let's call it 240,000, because that was the figure that the minister announced recently, that leaves us with, in effect, a figure of 124,000 active cases that we have that is currently in the system at various phases within the analysis process. So if we take the 180,000 cases that we had and we look at the reduction of 64,000 cases, that's a reduction of just over 35%. So while I would agree that progress has been slow, and that's due to a myriad of reasons, progress is being made.
Yeah, progress is being made. It's very difficult, though, Mark, to understand that. I mean, even the portfolio committee taking it to task at some point, saying it's unacceptable that the backlog is sitting at 172,000, and it's now sitting at, as you mentioned, 240,000. I'm just failing to see where you're saying the progress is.
So, Tabo, I think what we have to understand is that the challenges that have contributed to the backlog are rooted in a number of systemic issues that the Forensic Science Lab or SAPS have, been confronted with over a number of years, as Elanie has pointed out, that began to emerge from about 2018, 2019. These are predominantly within the supply chain management environment, and because of those challenges, mainly due to poor demand planning, systemic challenges in terms of procurement, supply chain processes, that led to key consumables and reagents that were needed in the analysis process, as well as bids and contracts for the maintenance and calibration of key equipment that's also used in that process, not being timelessly awarded. And that all had a snowball effect in contributing to the backlog. And those issues have all gradually been resolved. They did go through a process where they had to deviate from normal processes with National Treasury, to kind of act as a stopgap measure in order to procure the reagents and the consumables. But long-term measures are now being put in place, and the most recent information that I've just received is that many of those bids and contracts that were outstanding are now either have been awarded as recently as mid-October, or are in the process of being awarded towards the end of October, early November.
Wow.
So we will gradually start seeing, these backlogs being managed down. It is a frustratingly slow process. I think the board has to emphasize that it does share those frustrations, with civil society and the rest of the community out there. And that is particularly why the board has been working actively with SAPS and the Forensic Science Lab in an attempt to find lasting solutions to the problem. So it's not a case.
That's the challenge, right there. Elanie, I think you were in that conversation with the Forensic Science Lab with me earlier on in the year when they had confirmed that contracts were now in place. This issue of products and procurement and whatnot has been resolved, and now everything is continuing as it should. Now we're hearing some are only being confirmed now.
That's the thing, Thabo, and that's what's frustrating to us, and what we feel is becoming a miscarriage of justice, and why we actually laid the complaint, because for us it's becoming a matter of lip service, and it's the information that Mark is giving to us now. The DNA Oversight Board is an ethics board. I mean, they were put in place. They're being paid by taxpayers' money to help the SAPS, the police services, and the Forensic Science Laboratories to turn this thing around. And they're not communicating. They're not being held accountable. There's no reporting back. There's no feedback. I mean, we've been very vocal about the DNA backlog. And so have various other political parties, the DA, the Freedom Front Plus. But the Oversight Board are not coming to the party. They're not giving us this information. And once again, what you're saying now is what we heard in March and in June, and it's in October. So it doesn't feel to us that there's any progress being made.
Yeah. Mark, as I'm saying, I remember having this conversation distinctly in March. In March, they said, no, the contracts are now in place, and procurement of the required agents, everything is sorted out, and we're going to begin to see a move. But it seems that dysfunctionality is continuing. I mean, if you're saying we are finalizing those contracts now, mid-October, or even towards the end of October, which one is it?
So, Thabo, I hear you, and I think that is a valid point. I think what we should also consider is the volume of the contracts that need to be awarded in some of those environments. For instance, in one of the sections, for instance, there's 31 contracts that need to be awarded. Also, within that space, there were certain complexities in terms of the availability of service providers that wouldn't bid, for some of the contracts due to the unique nature of the services that were required. So there were a variety of factors that contributed to that. Having said that, I think that's no justification for the undue delays, and I think that does point to systemic issues within the supply chain management within SAPS. If I can just track back to Elanie's statement around the role of the board and the fact that the board has been put in place to resolve this problem specifically, I should point out that the board's mandate is clearly spelled out in Section 15. One of the key functions of the board is to advise the minister in terms of areas of improvement around the overall functionality of the National Forensic DNA Database, amongst others. And that's primarily what the board's function is. The board is not an implementation agency. It has no implementation mandate. So it cannot correct measures.
Let me challenge you on that.
On corrective measures.
Let me challenge you on that. The Portfolio Committee on Police, March the 2nd, 2021, saying, today we have instructed the newly appointed National Forensic Oversight and Ethics Board to urgently assist in finding solutions to the current dysfunctionality. They don't speak about advising them and saying, find the solutions to deal with the dysfunctionality.
Yeah, so, and that's precisely what that means is finding solutions but not implementing the solutions. So what we have been doing is been working with the Forensic Science Lab along with the private partners in terms of the GBVF fund that was launched by the President earlier this year to look at both short, medium and long-term solutions. So that's precisely what the board has been doing, is working cooperatively and collaboratively with a broad range of stakeholders and role players in trying to find these solutions.
But I think Elanie wants to know what are those actual solutions.
Okay,
let's take a break. I'll allow you to answer those questions when we come back. Mark Rogers, Elanie van der Walt staying with us tonight. We'll get more on those answers. What are those actual solutions next? Back with you tonight, and of course, Action Society taking now this matter to the public protector of the backlog of DNA. Elanie van der Walt with us, as well as Mark Rogers from the DNA board. So, Mark, before the break, is saying, what are the actual? So, let me first put out the challenges, right? Which are challenges that have been there, they've been highlighted to you. They have not changed since at least 2019. The supply chain management systems and processes. You've spoken about that. Those are the challenges. We know what's there. The procurement of the buccal sample kits, we know that's there. That's the issue. We've got additional challenges arising from delays in the amendment of the DNA Act and the IT challenges caused by the continuing FDA legal disputes. What solutions have you provided to those challenges?
Okay, so just to start off with, I think one of the key ones that I know Action Society has been calling for quite strongly is the DNA Amendment Bill, or the Convicted Offenders Bill, as they've been calling it, and the urgency of passing that bill. That bill has been presented to the Justice, Crime Prevention and Security Clusters Cabinet Committee on the 7th of October. So that bill is being processed for approval eventually. It was incorrect to say that the bill had been sitting on the President's desk for approval. So that's just one bit of misinformation that I needed to correct. But again, that was one thing that the board did take on quite strongly. Elanie will know that it was part of the handover process from the previous board. So that was something that the board did take on quite actively in trying to, speed that up, because that was an area of concern. I think, as Action Society has rightly pointed out, and the implications around delaying the passing of that bill. So that is one area that we have been actively advocating, for trying to speed that up. So we're trying to make sure that goes through pretty quickly. Another area that we're also working on that has an implication on, tracking and apprehending serial offenders is the establishment of forensic investigative units, which I think Elanie will also be fairly familiar with. And that was something that was included in the newly adopted regulations that were passed earlier this year. And that effectively now mandates that each province has to establish a forensic investigative unit that has to follow up on all forensic investigative leads that are generated by the forensic science labs. That may sound counterintuitive right now because we don't have any leads being generated, but you're asking us for what we're doing as part of the solution. So I'm just giving you some of the things that are being done. You refer to the FDA matter. That has been resolved with SAPS having developed its own forensic exhibit management system, which did come online earlier this year. And there are further modules to that system that are being developed and have come online. And that has assisted in SAPS being able to better track and manage the movement of its exhibits through the value chain. Yeah. So that has also allowed, better management of the backlog. So that's another solution. Another medium to long-term solution, obviously, which would greatly reduce and contribute to the sustainability of managing our forensic analysis in the country is obviously to roll out our forensic science labs across the country. Currently, we only have Johannesburg and Cape Town that conducts full forensic analysis, with Durban and East London only conducting partial analysis. But currently, processes are underway to get the Eastern Cape laboratory up to full functionality. So that's at an advanced stage. Hopefully that should be completed. Estimated time frame should be, I think, and I stand to be corrected, but my time frames, I think, should be towards the end of this year or early next year. Obviously, all factors considered. So once that lab is up and operational, that also alleviates or puts a lot of extra capacity into the system to increase the throughput. Right. Then there is also the public-private partnership in collaboration with the Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Response Fund. As I indicated earlier, that was launched by President Ramaphosa earlier this year and chaired by Dr. Judy Dlamini. And the lab is working in close collaboration with the fund, looking at how they can assist in guiding the labs in providing additional skills transfer, assistance in technology advice, upgrading of systems and technology. So there are various initiatives underway to look at both short, medium, and long-term interventions to not only restore and bring stability to the environment, but also to ensure that the SAPS and the FSR can once again become the world-class facility that it once was in terms of analysis.
Yeah, so fair enough. I mean, that sounds like you are doing something there with, of course, the unit being set, the bill quite advanced in its stages, and so on and so forth. But I suppose all these things, you can set them up. It's almost like you're putting up these offices, but the heart of this thing, the engine of this thing is that all forensic investigation is driven by science. And if the labs are not functioning optimally and they are not giving these units that you have built the type of information that they need, then having set them up, literally they are just sitting there idling, waiting for information, say, give us something to do.
I just want to actually ask Mark, in the last portfolio committee, they mentioned that there was 2 private labs that would be specifically dealing with the DNA backlog from the 1st of October 2021. One is at the University of Stellenbosch and the other one is in KwaZulu-Natal. I just want to find out what is the progress of that, because we're at the end of October already, and meeting
Sorry, Elanie. Elanie, we are missing that question there. Unfortunately, that connection not too great. You're asking about those 2 labs, one at Stellenbosch University and one in KwaZulu-Natal, and you say?
Yes, and then apparently they could handle 5,000 cases per week, and they would start working on the backlog, specifically on the backlog since the 1st of October. I just want to find out what's the progress on that.
Mark?
So the latest progress update that I have is that they are in the final stages of working on the system technicalities, just to ensure chain of custody issues are not compromised. But progress is still on track, but I'm not sure if that 1st of October date has in fact been met. Sorry.
Yeah. So what's a reasonable time frame that you can give us on when those 2 labs will be operational?
Well, I don't speak on behalf of the partnership or the GBVF fund, so I would have to clear that up with the fund. I only participate as a stakeholder, in that broader collaborative partnership, so I'm not at liberty to speak on behalf of the fund.
All right. Elanie, having heard what is being done and what is still outstanding, what then are you requesting the public protector to do?
Well, we're still requesting the public protector to investigate this whole DNA backlog crisis, and we've laid a complaint against the government, the Minister of Police, and the DNA Oversight Board, because we just feel it's such a miscarriage of justice, and that the public deserves to know, what's happening with the situation, and people need to be held accountable. Because once again, we're getting dates and we're getting numbers and we're getting figures. They never add up. The deadline's being pushed on every time. And at the end of the day, we're still sitting, as Mark mentioned earlier, if this is the correct figure, on 116,000 cases. That's 116,000 cases that can't go to court. And if the backlog is not being resolved, and according to the last portfolio committee, it's going to take up to 2022, November 2022, to sort out just the backlog. We're not talking about new cases. So people are not getting their day in court, Tabu, and that's the bottom line. The police minister, the police department, and the FSL government needs to be held responsible for robbing victims of crime, of rape, and of murder from justice. Cases are being struck off.
Yeah. Do we have a sense, or to ask, of how many cases are being withdrawn?
Well, recently, Gillian Bosman from the DA just did a sample in the Western Cape. And in the Western Cape alone, 160 GBV and sexual offence cases between December and April 2021 was struck off the roll because of the lack of DNA evidence. The recent figure that he gave was 37,647 cases, which are backlogged just in the Western Cape. Which are rape cases. I mean, these are rape victims that have to face their perpetrators every day walking in the street, that have to go to court over and over and over again. The perpetrators are getting out on bail and probably reoffending in the time that they're out on bail. So all the plans and the short-term, medium-term, long-term plans are all good and fine. But at the end of the day, people are not getting their day in court. And we just feel the information that Mark now conveyed is not being conveyed to the public. I mean, we've been very vocal about the DNA backlog, not just us, various other organizations have. Yeah. So I'm just saying, if you're being criticized in a public domain and you are actually doing something to fix this and you're getting results, surely you'd refute those claims and say, but listen, this is what we're doing, this is what's happening. But we never hear anything from the DNA board, from the forensic science laboratories on what's physically happening and how they're fixing this. They've got a lot of plans, and there's a lot of lip service, but we're not getting facts.
Yeah. Mark, what do you make of these hundreds of cases in the Western Cape alone that have now been withdrawn? What's the DNA board's view on that?
Well, look, I mean, the board naturally shares Elanie's concern and Action Society's concern that shouldn't be happening. Cases like that should not be withdrawn from the court roll, because that does deny those victims of those heinous crimes their right to justice. What I do know, and what I can say as one of the interventions that are currently in place as part of the broader GBVF partnership, is that they have been dedicated two nodal points that have been established between SAPS and the NPA to specifically prioritize those NPA backlogged cases, GBV cases, and looking at how those can be addressed to reduce that backlog. But naturally, the backlog is really high, and we have to look at it in the context of, I guess, the resource constraints at the NPA as well as the failings and the challenges from the DNA side. So it's a combination of factors, but again, there are interventions in place, but progress is probably not as quick as it needs to be.
How are you going to better communicate, Mark, that kind of progress? I think maybe what's partly the failure here is your communication strategy of the things that are being done.
Well, I would agree that I think communication probably hasn't been as proactive as it should be, and that's something that we would look at. Again, we would have to look at how we better approach, conveying those challenges as well as the successes, and being a bit more open and working constructively and collaboratively with partners such as Action Society and others out there to find lasting solutions to the challenges that we face, because ultimately we all share, a common goal and a common objective, and that's to ensure that we reduce the backlog and ensure that, as our Constitution says, that all people are and feel safe.
Mark Rogers from the DNA Board, appreciate your time, and Elanie van der Walt from Action.